252 million years ago, the world ended. Not with an asteroid, not with ice, but with fire. The Earth itself turned against life. Volcanoes erupted across what is now Siberia, not for days or years, but for centuries. They filled the air with poison, the oceans with acid, and the sky with darkness. When it was over, more than 90% of all life on Earth was gone. It was the greatest extinction in the planet's history. Scientists call it the Great Dying. It was the day the oceans died. Before the end came, the world was alive. The continents were joined into one, a supercontinent called Pangaea, stretching from pole to pole. Vast deserts filled its interior. Around its edges, warm, shallow seas teemed with life. There were coral reefs unlike any today, strange, twisted sponges, and shell creatures that built underwater forests. Giant dragonflies filled the skies. Amphibians the size of crocodiles stalked the swamps. Forests of towering trees covered the coastlines. It was a world bursting with oxygen and color. A golden age for life. But deep beneath the ground, pressure was building. A hidden rift in the Earth's crust was opening in what would one day be Siberia. Magma began to rise. For thousands of years, the planet rumbled quietly. And then, all at once, it erupted. The first eruptions were small, rivers of lava, fissures glowing red against the night. But the ground didn't stop shaking. Month after month, year after year, new fissures opened. The eruptions merged into one unstoppable inferno. What began as local devastation became planetary catastrophe. In total, the Siberian Traps covered more than 2 million square miles in molten rock, an area larger than Europe. The lava was so thick that in places it reached depths of 5 kilometers. For nearly 1 million years, the Earth bled fire. Each eruption released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and methane, greenhouse gases that trapped heat in the atmosphere. The global temperature began to climb. 5 degrees, then 8, then 10. The planet grew feverish. Oceans warmed, winds changed, rain turned acidic. Sulfur clouds filled the sky, blotting out the sun. The seas began to lose oxygen. The great coral reefs, the oldest ecosystems on Earth, started to crumble. Life had no refuge. The air was poison. The oceans were suffocating. At first, life tried to adapt. Some species fled deeper into the oceans. Others migrated toward the poles, searching for cooler climates. But there was nowhere left to hide. The heating oceans began to release their own methane from the sea floor, a deadly gas that fed the cycle, making the planet even hotter. Rain burned forests to ash. Rivers carried acid into the seas. What had started as volcanic fire became a global chain reaction. The balance that had sustained life for hundreds of millions of years was breaking apart. Plants withered. Animals choked. Whole ecosystems collapsed in weeks. And as the Earth warmed, the seas began to die from within. The surface of the ocean turned still and silent. Without oxygen, the water stagnated. Deep currents stopped moving. Sulfur-loving bacteria thrived in the anoxic depths, releasing hydrogen sulfide, a gas toxic to almost all life. The oceans turned green, then purple, then black. Fish floated to the surface by the millions, their bodies bloated, their scales dissolving in acid. Even the land began to rot. Wind carried the stench of death for thousands of miles. Ash fell like snow over forests of dying trees. The world became quiet, and in that silence, 90% of all marine life vanished. For the creatures that lived through it, there was no understanding, no explanation. Life simply ended. Reptiles, amphibians, insects, coral, plankton, entire branches of evolution were erased. It was the closest Earth has ever come to becoming a dead planet. In the fossil record, the line dividing life before and after the Permian is razor thin. One layer of stone marks abundance, the next, emptiness. Scientists call it the PT boundary, the Permian Triassic line. It is the tombstone of an entire world. No asteroid, no sudden impact, just the slow violence of a planet tearing itself apart. Volcano by volcano, century by century, the Earth killed its own creation. And when the last eruption ended, the world was silent. The sky was grey, the seas were dead, and the age of life was over. When the fires finally stopped, the silence began. For thousands of years, the Earth was quiet. Too quiet. The winds no longer carried birdsong or the rustle of forests. The oceans, once alive with movement, lay still. It was the sound of a planet emptied of life. The great dying had left behind a wounded world. Everywhere the signs of catastrophe were written into the stone. Layers of ash, layers of bone, layers of nothing. It was as if creation itself had paused. From space, the Earth would have looked familiar, blue and green, wrapped in clouds. But up close, it was unrecognizable. The air was toxic. The ground was scorched. Rainwater hissed as it fell, turning to acid on contact with stone. There were no coral reefs, no forests, no grass. The land was bare, stripped of life. Even the insects had disappeared. For the first and only time in Earth's history, the buzzing of flies and the hum of bees were gone. The very air had fallen silent. On land, temperatures soared. Without vegetation to absorb carbon dioxide, heat built unchecked. The soil turned to dust, the rivers to mud, the lakes to brine. The few surviving animals sought shelter underground or in caves, burrowing deep to escape the searing air. Among them were small reptile-like creatures, ancestors of mammals. Their survival would one day make our own possible. But above the ground, death ruled. The great amphibians that had once dominated the wetlands were gone. The towering forests of the Carboniferous were reduced to ash. With no trees, the air grew thin. Oxygen levels fell to some of the lowest in Earth's history, barely half of what we breathe today. Every breath was a struggle. And in the seas, things were even worse. The oceans had become chemical traps, layers of poison stacked upon each other. The surface was hot and sour, saturated with carbonic acid. Beneath it, the deeper layers were filled with hydrogen sulfide, a gas so lethal that it could kill any creature that rose too far towards the surface. Even plankton, the base of the food chain, could not survive. The seas that had once glowed with color were now dark and still. No reefs, no fish, no kelp. Only bacterial mats drifting through black water, feeding on decay. It was as though the ocean had turned against itself. Scientists studying ancient rocks can see it clearly. The black bands of shale formed when the seas went stagnant, and the chemical fingerprint of a world that had stopped breathing. For millions of years, this state persisted. Rainforests vanished. Deserts stretched across the heart of Pangaea from coast to coast. Volcanoes still smoldered, releasing heat and ash, though the worst had passed. The sky was thick and heavy, a dull copper haze. Lightning storms raged without rain. And yet, beneath that devastation, something was stirring. Life, though broken, was not finished. Hidden in burrows and deep ocean trenches, a few species endured. Tiny crustaceans, worms, single-celled algae, small reptilian survivors, the quiet remnants of a once-living world. They lived on the edge of extinction for millions of years, but those few survivors carried the code of life forward. Over time, the air began to clear. Ash settled. The temperature slowly fell. Rain became gentler. Volcanoes cooled. The planet was healing, though the recovery was painfully slow, far slower than the destruction. It took more than 5 million years before the ecosystems began to recover in any meaningful way. 5 million years of silence. 5 million years where Earth was nearly still. But eventually, green returned. Moss and ferns spread across the coastlines. Small reptiles emerged from hiding to hunt insects that had begun to return. The first conifer trees took root again. Their needles adapted to the arid, oxygen-starved air. Life was rebuilding itself from the ruins. In the oceans, microscopic algae were the first to come back. They released oxygen, recharging the air bit by bit. Corals began to evolve again, though it would take 10 million years before reefs reappeared. Fish diversified once more, adapting to the new chemistry of the seas. The survivors had evolved under relentless pressure. They were smaller, tougher, faster to reproduce. Evolution had hit a reset button. Everything that came after, dinosaurs, birds, mammals, and eventually humans, was built upon the handful of species that endured those 5 million years of hell. When paleontologists study the rocks from that era, they see two worlds, one before, full of abundance, and one after, a world reborn, cautious and strange. It was not the same planet anymore. The Earth that had existed before the Great Dying was gone forever.
The new Earth was hotter, drier, and more dangerous. The skies were different. The seas were darker. The balance of life had been rewritten. And on that fragile new foundation, the next age of life began. The age of reptiles. From the ashes of extinction, the ancestors of the dinosaurs rose. But the Great Dying had done more than just erase life. It had changed the planet itself. It altered the chemistry of the oceans, the makeup of the air, the course of evolution. It left a geological scar so deep that it can still be read in the stone today. For 5 million years, Earth had been a tomb, and yet somehow it recovered. The lesson of that time is not just destruction, but endurance. The planet's worst catastrophe had passed, but the memory of it is written in every breath of air we take and every wave that breaks against the shore. Because once, long ago, the oceans died, and the world came back to life.
When the Earth finally healed, the silence gave way to sound again. Rain fell softly on young forests. Wind whispered through the needles of conifer trees. The seas, once black and still, turned blue again. Slowly, the world remembered what it meant to be alive. New creatures emerged into the warmth of the Triassic dawn. The ancestors of the dinosaurs, small, nimble reptiles, hunted along the shorelines. Tiny mammals scurried through ferns. Insects filled the air again, and coral began to rebuild the ancient reefs. Life had returned, but it was not the same life that had come before. Evolution had rewritten the script. Everything that survived the Great Dying had been reshaped by fire and famine. The survivors were tougher, leaner, faster, more adaptable. They were the descendants of endurance itself. From that remade Earth, all future life would descend. The dinosaurs, the birds, the mammals, and ultimately, us. We are the children of catastrophe. The scars of the Great Dying still lie hidden beneath our feet. In the rocks of Siberia, scientists can see the ancient lava flows,
a frozen ocean of stone that once burned red-hot for centuries. In the cliffs of China and South Africa, they find the boundary layer, a razor-thin band of black shale, all that remains of the dead oceans. And inside those layers, they find the fingerprints of a planet in collapse. Carbon isotopes showing runaway warming, sulfur traces from volcanic ash, and the unmistakable signs of acidified seas. Every sample tells the same story. The world got too hot, too fast, and life could not keep up. For millions of years afterward, the Earth balanced on a knife's edge. Temperatures remained high, oxygen low. Each new generation of life evolved in the shadow of the one that had perished. It took 10 million years for the planet to regain anything like stability. And even then, the balance was fragile. The memory of fire still hung in the air. But in that slow recovery, the foundations of the modern world were born. New ecosystems emerged, more complex than before. Predators became smarter, prey became faster, and nature began to experiment again. The extinction had cleared the slate, and from that emptiness, life learned resilience. Today, scientists study the Great Dying not as a distant tragedy, but as a mirror, because the forces that ended that ancient world are stirring again. Rising carbon dioxide, warming oceans, falling oxygen levels, mass extinction. The same chain of cause and effect that once erased 90% of life is now happening in slow motion, driven not by volcanoes, but by us. The rate of carbon released today rivals what happened at the end of the Permian. The chemistry of the modern ocean is changing in ways eerily similar to that time, and just like before, the reefs are dying first. We are watching, in real time, the early stages of another great dying. But the story of the Permian tells us something vital. It tells us that the Earth will survive. The question is whether we will. The planet has endured fire, ice, poison, and silence. It has been through worse than anything humanity can imagine. Life always returns, but it does not return the same. If we continue to push the planet's systems beyond their limits, the Earth will simply begin again without us. It will erase what it must, and rebuild in its own time. That is the lesson of the Great Dying. Life endures, but never guarantees the survival of those who caused the crisis. When you stand beside the sea and feel the wind on your face, you are feeling the breath of a world that once stopped breathing. Every wave that crashes against the shore is a heartbeat that almost ended. Every living creature carries within it the memory of those who did not survive. We are the echoes of the few who made it through. And the choices we make now, how we treat our oceans, our atmosphere, our fragile world, will decide whether life's story continues or ends again. Because once, long ago, the Earth killed almost everything it had created, and it can do it again. The Great Dying was not just a chapter of prehistory. It was a warning, a whisper from the stone, reminding us that the planet is patient, and that life, though eternal, owes us nothing. The day the oceans died was also the day life began again, and from that fragile beginning came every living thing that walks, swims, or breathes today. The story of the Great Dying is not just about extinction, it's about rebirth. It's about a world that fell silent and then found its voice again. And as long as we remember it, perhaps we won't make the same mistake twice.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more deep dives into the world's incredible histories.